Great games at your table. I'm Jonathan Albin. This is Game Master's Toolbox, and today I'm going to be providing you with the only tool you'll ever need as a game master to run any situation you want to with your games group. Now, I'm going to be going over this in terms of a document that I've provided through NikosRPG.com. You can go there and go to the Play Now section and download the CID, and that would be the only tool you're going to need, and I'm going to kind of walk you through how to use it. Now, I'm not going to be using any visuals here, so just as my regular game sessions, we're going to be doing this fundamentally as a theater of the mind. And for more information, of course, you can PM me directly and I can get you additional information. But the CID is downloadable from the NikosRPG.com website. So go there for the form, download it, and you'll see what I'm talking about. I'm going to be using some terminology that is specific to the form, and even some of that may have changed because I'm constantly building and changing and adapting to make it the best it can be. Having said that, before we get started, make sure you go down below and push all the buttons so that the algorithm will know that you're part of our audience, and we will get after it.
Absorbing damage is the name of the game. From the claws of monsters or the heat from a ball of flame, or strength in numbers is a roll of the dice.
Alrighty, so this document, the CID that I'm referring to, is the Community Identity document, or in this case I'm also calling it the DAB, and that's the Director's Assist Binder. It's just basically a term for the actual form itself. We're going to be going into each of the sections of the DAB, the CID, and walking through why each portion is necessary, useful to you as a game master. And I think as you go through the pieces and see how they work together, you'll begin to understand how easily this one document can become your end-all for the questions you might have about a particular place within your games. Now, the concept of this binder is you build it for a specific location in the story, whether it be a particular encounter or if it's the larger scale of actions that a group might take within a zone or an area. I usually consider it this way. The games group generally will go to a location, stay to do a few episodes within that realm, and then they move on to another location. And so each time you would have one of these static locations, you'd want to have one of these CID developed because it provides you with instantaneous access to the numbers. And if you listen in, you'll also be able to see how you can use these CIDs to actually have your adventure level up and your adventure to improve over time, session after session, depending on what the players do there. So let's get started. So the first part of the DAB or the CID is the location values, and the location values are a spread of numeric values that cover the location's aesthetic appeal, its cultural relevance to the community, its relative military material wealth, its abilities, its self-sufficiency, its sophistication, and ultimately its trade relevance in terms of the larger scale of your world. And if you have been a world builder as long as I have, you know that sometimes it's difficult to put a real finger on what's going on within a game session's area in terms of what the players may or may not be able to access. And so by using these 6 divisors, you're able to create a logical progression for the location's numeric values. Now, I utilize the ramp system. If you're not familiar with that, it's a cascading increasing value test that you can build for your adventures. And the basic idea here is that the ramped values are never going to, or at least in theory, are never going to be so overpowering as to be, absolute, so that even with the best of a local appearance, its aesthetics don't necessarily appeal to everyone. And so these are general numbers that provide some information about that locale. Now, we utilize the ramp system only to come up with a general value for them, but they're going to range anywhere between, say, 15 to up to like 65 or 70%. And the only reason to have these numbers at all is so that when players ask questions, you can determine the validity or the relevance of the question that they ask and give them a response. So, for example, if a local person wants to start a business in that area, they say they want to come in and start doing, forestry, and they want to do that as a career within the realm of the adventure, then you can see whether or not the local material wealth is going to be sufficient to support them. And the numeric values of these specific categories will bear that out. In particular, these are useful for giving an ambiance value to those locations so that a player can feel like they are in an actual place. Now, each of the segments, such as in this case talking about the location base values, these values give you general numbers to roll against for your own awareness of the community. And if in particular you're running an ongoing campaign, these numbers become not only relevant now, but as time goes by, you can advance them much like a character would advance their particular attributes with use. So, for example, if they are comparing with their local material wealth number, then let's say it's a 35, the players interact, they decide to do some trade with the town, and you determine that that's enough money being pumped into the local economy that it could actually change these numbers and improve the marketability of the community and therefore raise that mercantile value. Generally, I use this in a one-to-one correlation. So when the players interact in a town, let's say they've finished their adventure, they've come back to town, and they want to trade some of the items that they've gathered, whether it be actual loot or whether it is relative value like the furs or the if they gathered crops or whatever, they could sell those into the marketplace and therefore change the economy. And by making this a push me pull you, in other words, when the players just determine that they're going to buy something of value from the town, that technically could lower the town's marketability because there's less to sell to someone else. So you can use these numbers kind of as a ballast, if you will, to keep the story going. Now, if they don't stay in the locale for very long, of course, that individual CID won't necessarily modify much, but if they stay and work in the area, they can actually increase these numbers over time, making it feel like a living community. And that really is kind of the point. You want the players to feel their experience in a location has some value and has some effect on the economy. So then we go to the cartographic details. And from a narrative standpoint, realize that the majority of what I'm talking about is operating in the theater of the mind element. We're not actually looking for you to have to draw pictures or create graphics. What we are talking about instead, though, is the ability to identify your story by details. And so the cartographic details of the community would be, for example, what is this location type? Are we talking about a hamlet? Are we talking about a city? Are we talking about a village? Are we talking about a megalopolis? By having an idea of what your location type is, then now you can give a better, more rich description of what might be within that location. The next thing would be the location's relative position. Are you close by other locations? Are there other communities with which this community trades? are we looking at a desolate wasteland where this is the singular location for trade? In addition, are we looking at by the means of access, we would be referring to what kinds of vehicles can come into this community. Is it a rough, rugged trail, therefore unlikely to have regular commerce? Or is it got great thoroughfares and main runways? Perhaps it's a area only accessible by flying vehicles, and so therefore the means of access is going to give a greater definition of what the players might expect from that particular community. Now, these are set up to be the area in which they are staging themselves, and so this might be as simple as the location type being a desolate, a farmland, a remote farmland, and therefore the location type is a singular house. So the idea of the access to these things is going to be greatly influenced by what you have in your mind, and this form, the DAB or the CID, provides you with a place to track this kind of information. Things like the population density. Even if it's a village, perhaps it's not a very well populated area, and so village is a stretch on the definition, and therefore you can get an idea of, for example, how many children might be in the area, what kind of programs do they have within the community to watch out for each other. Is it, are they a bunch of soloists, or are they connected together? This leads into the next one, which is social integration. If it is a close-knit community, then close-knit would be the integration, and therefore the ability of that local communication to be stronger would be relevant. And these, of course, can be given numeric values to determine what detail of integration. And the Nikos RPG tends to have these broken down into 15 percentage point increments so that you can scale what's going on. And then finally, the last thing is aggression, and that is really referring to what is the ultimate danger level in this community. Is it placid, peaceful, very low aggression, or are these a bunch of paranoid individuals that want their safety and security and therefore are aggressive towards those that are visiting the community? These are all things that can be played out by having a numeric value for these, so that you have a general understanding of what your community is like, so that a player can interact with those number values. Now we're going to talk about something a little bit more general. And this is a section of the DAB where you're actually recording your scenes, your settings, your personalities. What kinds of conditions might the players find themselves in? If there is a monstrous lair nearby, you would have that perhaps listed. If there is a herd area where the local fauna tends to pass through, then you'd include that as a potential scene. These descriptions are prompts, if you will. They give you a way and a place to give definition to the setting and make it a more rich place for the players to interact with. Now notice this is all on page 1 of your assets, and so we're going to go into a lot more detail, but already you've got a visual of the town, you've got an idea of how pretty or boring the location is, you have an idea of how the community is going to react to the players within the space. But now we're going to be diving into page 2 of the document, and as we do so, we've got some additional information to cover. So now as we go to page 2, we have pretty much a drill down in terms of the details of the community. And again, we're using the ramp system to develop these numbers, but only if you choose to. You can be as precise or as imprecise as you want as a storyteller to make your players interact. The first section we're going to talk about are the attributes of the community. And these attributes are talking about the community as a whole. And that is perhaps a little confusing. If we were talking about a setting that is relatively low population, then these attributes aren't necessarily as strong, but they will define people that are in this community. So, for example, let's say you determine that they are staying out in the wilderness. Well, if they happen upon an individual, what is that individual's position going to be on these topics? When it talks about adaptability, how willing is the individual to make other changes or to adapt to their situation? If the adventurers are particularly aggressive and threatening, how quickly will these non-player personas that they run into get out of their way or be willing to communicate with them? Obviously, the higher the density of the population, the more difficult it would be to make that community adaptable, unless there are reasons. And so, therefore, you start to build for yourself a deeper story about that locale, so that the players feel the presence of your setting fundamentally as another character in the story. So when you're talking about the adaptability is what they are capable of doing, but their responsiveness is how quickly do they respond. If the adventurers determine that they're going to give trouble to the locals, how quickly do the locals react to that? If they don't have a very strong responsiveness, then they may not actually respond at all, or they may be more pacifying in their response. So the point here is that these numbers, once you've got them all developed, they give you a kind of a feel for what the community is like. The next one down, of course, is ideology. And in the case of ideology, we're talking about what are the processes that the town goes through in their activities. Are they ideologues? Do they have a singular purpose in mind, or are they rather laissez-faire and happen to all share the community but not be involved in the development thereof? So this concept of ideology is talking about how culturally strong this individual culture is. Next one is their affability, and that is, if they are responsive, are they going to be paying attention to the sad story that the players give, or are they more than likely going to close them out? So a high affability means they're more, if you will, gullible, and they therefore have a chance of reacting differently based on the numeric values. Stability is how willing are they to let problems pass over them, or are they going to be stalwart in holding their position? And then finally, determination is how well or how strongly they are convicted in their ideological framework to hold their position. So this variability in these attributes gives you the ability to make this particular community, this location, feel a certain way, and these numbers give you a great way of sharing that. So now we're going to talk about resource availability. And resource availability is really looking at what in the town might be helpful to the players and what the players may be looking for and how likely they are to find those things. Now, these are set, the resources are set in terms of the classic Nikos RPG ways structure, simply saying that these are people who are dedicated to this particular job. So, for example, if we were talking about the searchers in the area, that means that if you are a new person, you've come into town, and you are looking for someone to help you find a location or find a thing, then you'd have a ramped value for the searchers in the community, and you can see whether or not an individual has the awareness of that. Now, this doesn't mean that person is necessarily a searcher. It just means that their searcher characteristics are represented by that number. So, again, a smaller, broader community might have a broader spectrum of these different resource tracks. But then again, they also might have a more general knowledge. And so these values are going to be adapted as well by the direction that the players take when they come into town. So if they are going to be adding to the ability to find things, then they are going to improve the town's searchers. The other titles, such as Sneaks, Supports, Talkers, Tanks, and Tinkers, are really just referring to what do you do when a person comes into town and is looking for somebody of this particular ilk. And so you can roll to see whether or not they can find the resource assistance that they're looking for. And by doing this numerically like this, it means that the community now has a solid foundation for future attempts in the same locale. If they don't have a particularly good value, for example, in Sneaks, then they are more than likely a forthright and trusting community that doesn't have truck with anybody of that nature, and so therefore it will affect how they play out each time your players come into town to communicate. The real element here is that by having this resource availability as a numeric, you can then actually gauge how the players are going to progress in the town. If they have to do research but there's nothing here, then perhaps they may move on to another community, or they may actually add to the community's capabilities themselves by being trusting enough to share the information they've gathered. Next, we're going to talk about the economic balance in the city, and this one's rather tentative, only because quite often when we hear about economic balance, I got ahead of myself. This idea of economic balance is just saying how many people in the local area are of the upper class, how many people of the middle class, and how many people of the lower classes. And you can ramp for these because there might be some people that cross those barriers or somewhere in the middle. But you could actually pick and just say, no, there's no upper classes in the area. Or perhaps there's they've driven the middle class out of existence, so it's only uppers and lowers. And by choosing this, you're helping to give a flavor to your locale so that the players can interact with that as you are hoping for them to do. Occupations and trades. Oh, I'm getting ahead of myself. Did I miss a slide? No. I'm still on page. I just must have missed a bump there. Oh, I may have. Another thing to mention is the cultural availability. And this really plays into Nikos RPG's concepts of estates and place. When you have a locale, you can ascribe to it attributes that are approximating those particular estates or places so that players can build up their awareness of the skills that come from those. And by letting us know what the possibilities are here by putting a numeric value, you can determine whether or not a particular skill or a group of skills might be accessible from this community. Tying directly to this, therefore, are the occupations and trades. That's how I got ahead of myself. Aha. So when we're talking about occupations and trades, now we're talking about the drill down of the local community. Perhaps when you build this position, you have the idea that there is a blacksmith in town. Well, great. So is the blacksmith truly a blacksmith, or perhaps he has some skill in the finer arts. Perhaps he has a little bit of silversmithing. Perhaps he actually is a locksmith. And by utilizing occupations and trades, you can differentiate out the particular skill groupings so that the players can interact with them in terms, of finding out what that local community can provide in terms of these types of training. If they have no silversmith, then the idea of doing any of the fine arts is going to be left down to what they might find in a treatise or something that might be shared from one of the locals who might be a specialist, in which case then you would add them to your occupations list and give them a numeric value. The idea is that you can customize this sheet for the particulars of the community that you're serving. And there we go. There's another balance. Now we go on. All right, and the final piece of this is relative positioning. Now, in other episodes of Around the World in Around 80 Days, we have talked about the idea of mapping. The idea is that you build the map in a general way, just so you can keep in your head clearly where things are. So the idea of relative positioning is the blacksmith on the north end of town, or is he on the south side of town? Is he east or west? And by having these general descriptive characteristics, you can communicate even down to a single road running east-west, a thoroughfare in town, and the locations only being east or west along that axis. Or you could say, well, there actually might be a church to the south of town, as for that one location gets listed. The idea of having the relative positioning gives you a way of conveying information about proximity, how close things are, and also to give a clearly perceptive design to where they are. And as your players push back on you about where those locations are compared to one another, you can actually create a much more finite mapping of your community, your town, and therefore provide your players with additional information that they might not have considered when they first came in, even if you don't have a single graphic, a single image of what the town is like. They certainly get a feel for where these locations are compared to one another. So the reality is that this entire project, the CID, the DAB, whatever you want to call it, is a tool. The community identity sheet provides you with drawdown information about the local community in a way that makes sense, and that the players can have a better idea of what is there. And you as a game master can know that information, once created, is a physical, tangible place. So when they go from one place to another, you simply pull out the CIS for that community, and now you're set to run whatever they want to engage in, whether it be local community dynamics and simple trade, or whether they are looking for mysterious connections and perhaps criminal elements within that. And I'll do additional videos on this kind of information if you want them. The CIS is available, and I'll put the link down below on how to get a hold of that from the NICOSRPG.com website. And if you want to become a part of our community, check us out at patreon.com/Nikos. Until we get there, until we get to that point, hope to see you again in our next episode. I do record 5 or 6 times a week, so I will see you in the next one. And don't forget what Granddad always says, go play.